So I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I have a couple of apologies, but as I say, if I can just go through the list of attendance first, if I call out your name, if you'd just like to make acknowledge that you're here, please. Councillor Durham?
Present.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got apologies from Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Cruddas?
Here.
Yep, thanks very much, Councillor. Councillor Lee?
Here.
Thanks, Councillor. I have apologies from Councillor McEwen and Councillor Paley. Hasn't joined the meeting yet, so I don't know if anybody has her apologies. So I'll mark her as absent at the moment. Thank you. We also have a number of officers which shall be introduced as we go along, and we've got Helen Henshaw from Ernst Young, our external auditors, present with us too. The second item on the agenda for today's meeting is to appoint a chair for the municipal year 2020-21. If I have any nominations for the chair, could you please raise your electronic hand? Councillor Durham? Yep.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Gerald Lee for chair of this committee.
Is that seconded, please?
I'll second that.
Councillor Cruddas, thank you. Can I just take a vote on the nomination for Councillor Lee to be chair? Councillor Durham, are you in favour or against?
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Cruddas, are you in favour or against?
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor Lee?
For.
Thank you very much. So, as I say, that motion is carried. So, Councillor Lee, if you'd please like to take the chair, please.
Thank you, Alison. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Audit Committee on the 16th of September. We now need to look on item 3, which is to appoint a vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair? Wait a minute. Could I nominate Councillor Cruddas?
I'll second that, chair.
Do you want me to go through the vote again, Councillor Lee? I can call out with people, just say whether they're in favour or against for Councillor Cruddas to be vice chair. Councillor Durham, are you?
For.
For, thank you. Councillor Cruddas? For, thank you. And Councillor Lee?
For.
Right, thank you. That's carried for Councillor Cruddas to be the vice chair of the Audit Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Do we have any interest from councillors? No, thank you. 5 is to consider future meetings of the committee for the municipal year 2020-2021. Have we any dates, Alison, or do we set them?
The dates are the remaining in the municipal calendar, so really it's just now if you're happy with the time of 9:30 or anybody wants to propose a separate start time.
Anyone got any objections to 9:30? No.
That's fine, 9:30, thank you.
Item 6 is to approve the minutes of this committee held on 29th of January 2020. Are we okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine, yeah.
Yeah, I was present, I agree.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, the external audit annual plan. Who's doing the presentation for that one?
That's me. Sorry, I'll introduce that one, Chair. That Peter Carrick, Finance Manager. This one actually it was scheduled to go to April Audit Committee, but obviously it was cancelled due to COVID. But we thought it was distributed to members at the time, but we thought we need to sort of formally approve it. So we brought it back to this meeting, and Helen Henshaw, who's the lead auditor, is going to go through it for us. Thanks, Peter. Would you like me to do that now, Chair?
Would please. Could I just make a comment? Could we, if we have any of these brought to us before, could we have it in landscape so we can see most of it? Some of the writing is very, very small, and I think it would have benefited if it made it reading a lot easier had it gone round the other way so the writing is bigger, printing. More detail, but I'm sure you could do that. And thank you, Helen.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So the
as you'll see, the report is written to the committee by my predecessor, Nicola Wright. Nicola moved on from EY earlier this year around May. So this is the first time I've been to this committee. As Peter said, my name's Helen Henshaw. I'm an associate partner with EY, and I've taken over the engagement lead role for Darlington Borough Council this year. The plan, as I will assume, is read, given this is the sort of second time it's been sent to the committee now. So I'll just take you through the main points, if I may. Page 5 of the plan sets out the significant and inherent risks as identified for the audit this year. You'll see there that there are 2 matters identified as a fraud stroke significant risk. One is the risk that there is fraud in the recognition of revenue and expenditure. This is something which is assumed to be a risk on every audit. It's laid down in auditing standards that risk is there. So it's not specific to Darlington, but it is an item that we need to address, and we focus that risk by looking at particular areas of the account where we think it might occur, and that's primarily in this case inappropriate capitalisation of expenditure, the recognition of grant income, and ensuring that all the expenditure that's been incurred in a year is actually recognised in the account in a year. So that's the particular areas that we target in looking at that risk. The second risk noted there is what's referred to as misstatements due to fraud or error. Another way of looking at this is effectively management override. So we'll all appreciate the fact that management are in a fairly unique position because they are able to override controls that would otherwise be designed and operating effectively. Again, this is not a risk that's specific to Darlington. It's laid down in auditing standards that we are required to acknowledge the fact that this risk exists and perform procedures to determine whether, in fact, management override has happened in this way and created any material misstatement in the financial statements. And we do that by certain risk-based work, so looking at estimates and the like, which have gone into the accounts and the extent to which there's management bias in those, looking at journal entries which have been posted, which trigger certain risk criteria. So you will be familiar, no doubt, if you've seen a plan like this before, of those 2 types of risks. Then we go on to slightly more specific matters for Darlington, the first of which is the valuation of the land and buildings and investment properties. Now, at the time the plan was written, this had been downgraded to an inherent risk from a significant risk in the prior year. The main reason for downgrading it was the lack of issues found in the previous period. It's fair to say that COVID-19, and you'll note from the report, there's reference here to how things might change as COVID-19 has moved on for everybody since the time that this was written back in April. The presence of COVID-19 and what that has done to markets and the level of uncertainty around valuations means that we have focused more of our effort on valuations of land and building, and particularly investment properties, than was envisaged at the time of writing this plan. And that's purely to address that additional risk that sits around COVID. We then talk about the pension liability valuation, and you'll all be aware of the size of the pension liability as it sits on the council's balance sheet, and the fact that that number is effectively generated by a number of actuarial assumptions, which only need very small changes in them to create very, very large movements in your financial statements. So our approach to auditing that is to involve EY actuaries to challenge some of those assumptions and to also gain assurance from the auditors of the pension fund themselves. And then lastly, on that page 5, we talk about the group accounts and the fact that there are the 4 joint ventures in operation, which the council brings into its share of those joint ventures into the group accounts of Darlington for each financial year end, and our work around making sure that those have been appropriately accounted for in the group accounts. And then if I take you on one more page, page 6, you'll appreciate that in addition to the opinion that we give on the truth and fairness of the financial statements, we're also required under the code to give or to form a conclusion on the arrangements for securing value for money at the council. And where we identify any significant risks to those arrangements, then we perform additional procedures in order to form our conclusion. And the risk that's been identified here is around financial sustainability of the council. Whilst this is not an assumed risk, it's not an uncommon risk in this day and age, to be perfectly honest, to have financial sustainability as a risk to local government arrangements. And that's largely driven by the pressures on council finances, particularly at the current time, and the need to deliver savings in order to effectively achieve a balanced budget over the short to medium term. So that's the reason for that being a particular risk this year. If I take you on to page 7, that again mentions the impact of COVID-19, and you'll hear more fully when we come back in October to present our audit results report about exactly what we have done during the course of our work in addition to address some of the risks of COVID-19. So I won't labour too much on that now. Materiality, you can see, was set at 2% of gross expenditure, which is in line with previous years, and it is at the upper end of the range that we tend to use. Performance materiality, which effectively narrows that planning materiality down to the individual asset, liability, income, expenditure class, if you like, we set at 75% of materiality. There's effectively two choices we have there. It can be set at 50% or 75% of materiality. And largely what determines that is the extent to which we expect to find errors in the accounts based on our previous experience with auditing the organisation with the finance team. And we have not in the past experienced high volumes of errors in the account, so we've set that level at 75% of materiality. So that's a good reflection, if you like, on the control environment and our view of the finance function's ability to produce a good, reliable set of accounts. And then we drop that down further to a figure of £272,000, which is the cut-off level, which I would describe matters beneath that to be clearly inconsequential. So anything that we identify in our review of the accounts, which is more than 272,000, would be reported back to this committee, whether or not management decided to make any adjustment in the accounts for those matters. The other element of the report I would just like to turn your attention to, if I may, is on page 14. There is discussion around going concern. Now, at the time the plan was written, the focus of going concern was really upon making you aware of additional requirements that are being placed upon auditors with an update to the going concern auditing standard, and the additional work that will require, and that's what page 14 talks to. I think it's also relevant to just build into this some of the commentary that's also on page 15, just to let you know that obviously, given the situation which the world finds itself in now, having had a few months of being exposed to COVID-19 and the difficulties that has placed on local and central government, there will be more disclosures required in the financial statements this year with regards to going concern, and there will be more effort required on the part of both management and ourselves as auditor to really look in detail over the going concern period, which is 12 months from the date you approve the accounts, not 12 months from the balance sheet date. So we're really looking out to, say, November 2021 to make sure that from a reserves and a liquidity point of view, the going concern assumption continues to be appropriate, and that the disclosures within the financial statements give the reader the right context in terms of understanding the challenges that the council face over that period in order to continue to function and deliver service. So it's important to recognise that will be an additional area of focus for both ourselves and it's fair to say Peter and the team this year. And at that point, I was going to stop and just ask the committee if they had any questions.
Does any of the committee have any questions based on what we've heard? Councillor Durham, okay?
No questions, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. We'll just continue. Okay, Helen?
Okay.
Yeah.
In terms of the report, I think it's also pertinent to just point out to the committee, towards the back of the report, bear with me one moment, my screen's frozen, sorry. In the appendices on, here we go, page 35, there's a fee table there that sets out the fees for the audit. I am aware that the various committee members may be aware of discussions that have been happening, and you potentially will have received communication from Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, the body which is responsible for setting your audit fee. There is ongoing discussions about the level of audit fees currently, which is why at the moment you can see on that page in the appendix, we've set out what the scale fee for the audit is this year, which is set under the contract with PSAA. There are procedures which will need to be performed this year over and above those that were envisaged at the setting of the scale fee. And the process for dealing with that is for ourselves to have a discussion with management and come to an agreement effectively as to what a fair remuneration for that additional work would be, and that ultimately gets approved by, or not, as the case may be, by Public Sector Audit Appointments, PSAA, as being the final fee for the year. So that's an explanation for why that fee table looks the way it does, but happy to take any questions on that as well.
Just the timescale, Helen, when will this happen? When will this discussion be held and decisions made on?
So the discussion on the additional costs incurred won't happen, Councillor, until the work itself has been done, because any fees are based on actual work performed as opposed to an anticipation of what that might be. So I wouldn't expect to be having those conversations for another month or so yet. Once ourselves and the council agree on a position, then it goes to PSAA for their, if you like, they have their final word, and that can take some time.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else you were adding to your report?
No, I don't think so.
So, can we take it that given all the uncertainties that's happening at the moment, the COVID, the problem with pensions, the problem with and the inherent debt that we have, that as far as Ernst & Young are concerned, everything is as it ought to be within Dallingsborough Borough Council?
So the audit is progressing in accordance with the plan and the timetable. I don't have any concerns with the progress of the audit to date. There are a number of items that are still to be concluded, as you would probably expect at this point in time. But I don't have any issues or particular concerns to bring to the committee's attention today.
Councillors, are we happy with that?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Brothers, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Helen, for the report. It's very comprehensive, but do try and make the printing a little bit bigger for us older ones to see. Thank you.
Chair, can I just draw your attention? Councillor Pearley has joined us, and I think she had a hand raised.
Oh no, it's fine. Sorry, I had some technical issues this morning, but I'm logged on now. I was just agreeing. Thank you, Councillor Durham.
Sorry, Councillor Pearley, I can't.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
No problem.
Moving on to item 7. Item 8. Annual review of significant partnerships. Who's dealing with that one?
Thank you, Chair. That's me, Seth.
Hello, Seth. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes, thank you, Chair. This report takes you through the council's responsibility in relation to partnerships, how that responsibility is carried out, and describes the classification of partnerships that are being monitored, and then describes the performance of those partnerships with respect to the council's responsibilities. The report is here to be noted for information and comment. So if we can go to paragraph 5, which outlines the responsibilities that public bodies have in relation to partnerships, that they know that the partnerships they're involved with and how much money or other resources they're invested in them, can take hard decisions to scale down their involvement in partnerships if the costs outweigh benefits, agree and regularly review protocols and governing documents with all partners. So to demonstrate its fulfilment, the Cabinet adopted a partnership toolkit in March 2007, and that toolkit has continued to be used from that point forward, and it relies on lead officers to complete a questionnaire which is then taken into review and monitored. If we go to paragraph 8, we can look at what is defined as a significant partnership. Clearly this is important because it's important that we have a definition of what a significant partnership is, so as that we know which ones that we are talking about. So in that, if you'll see the criteria is outlined in 8A to 8F. So in Darlington, then for Darlington Borough Council, those significant partnerships are the 11 to 19 partnership, Creative Darlington, Darlington Partnership Board, the LSP, Darlington Safeguarding, Darlington Youth Offending Service, and Safe and Cohesive Communities Group. Each of those fills in a questionnaire and is considered within the toolkit as outlined above. If I can then move down to the performance and governance of those partnerships for 2019 to 2020, the comment that I can make is that the annual review of the performance have been completed by the relevant council officers, and moving through 11 to 15, all partnerships have evidenced good performance towards the identified objectives for 2019. And have established revised objectives going forward. Partnerships are complying with the governance requirements covered by the toolkit, with a few outstanding actions which, at the time of writing this report, but are up to date. Clearly, as you'd expect, reduction in funding and the consequent effect on capacity are the predominant issues raised by lead officers that have potential implications for the effective operation of the partnerships. And this is being monitored closely by each of the responding officers. As members are likely aware, the Chief Officer Executive, along with Cabinet, have been considering the future of Darlington Partnership, which has not met since December 2019. So it is likely that there will be revised reporting in relation to this area next year. And as just so we're clear, the position of each issue raised will continue to be monitored by the relevant partnership lead officers. So, Chair, that's the report to be noted for information and comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Any questions, councillors? Seth? Councillor Credit?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Seth, obviously this doesn't mention all the wonderful work that your people got through during the COVID, and you know, I assume that the funding for the partnerships that's mentioned here there must have been some impact because of the efforts to support people during COVID, but presumably there was extra funding to do that hopefully hasn't detracted from the partnerships that we already are running. Could you just speak something about that, please? Yeah,
thank you, Councillor. Yeah, the purpose of this report is really about governance, and it forms part of the council's governance statements. And when we're talking about performance, it's in relation to its good governance and performing as a partnership. But I clearly take your point, and yeah, I think we really need to celebrate as a local authority the work that has been carried out by the council and by its partners, which is, I think, what you're getting at, which has been absolutely tremendous from start to finish. We've achieved some great things in partnership with organisations, and we've mitigated a lot of harm and a lot of impact on the people of Darlington cohesively. And I do think that we need to capture that and reflect it. So I completely agree with you, Councillor.
Thank you for that, Seth. I think all council would agree with you on that, Seth. There's been some incredible work done over the last 6 months, and all credits done to everyone who has been involved. And from council, I'm quite convinced that we are all proud of what you've actually achieved. Just a small question on objectives set to the partners. Do we see, as a small committee, do we see what those objectives are and the results against the objectives?
Yes, Chair, we do. And if I can bring you to paragraph 10, there's a link there which will take you to all the responses and the pro forma, which outlines what the last year's objectives were and what the objectives of those partnerships are going forward.
But will we see the result against the objectives? In other words, will we physically see what objectives are being set and how far they've achieved them?
A summary is given in those documents that are captured in that there. I guess if you wanted a fuller description, but it is a précis to be, that's required. And I think to capture the full work would require asking each of them individually for a report, which I'm sure they give. I believe, or certainly several of them will be reporting into other committees. So that is probably easily got hold of, actually, Councillor.
I think it's quite important as far as the Audit Committee is concerned. If the council are allocating money to help support for all the right reasons, at least we get some indication of just how successful and useful that money is being spent. So to councillors, are we happy to note the report? Okay. Thank you very much, Seth.
Councillor Lee, I think Councillor Durham had his hand up.
Sorry, Councillor Durham.
No, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back to the annual partnership reviews. If I could just go to the 11 to 19 partnership, and I've just got a question in terms of the budget administered. Now it obviously points to one DBC resources from staff time there, £3,900, and then other partners 31,000. But when I actually look at who the other partners are, when I'm just trying to work that out in my own head, it doesn't seem a lot in terms of time that's been allocated to that partnership. You just maybe expand a little bit. I'm not all fair with the partnership itself, Seth.
Yeah, so I have some knowledge of that. Clearly, my job in this instance, Councillor Durham, is about the performance and governance of the partnership, rather than its actual operations and objectives. If you take my point on it, the 11 to 19 partnership brings together all those agencies, and particularly the heads of the schools and the colleges in one place, so that they can get a clear understanding of issues that are affecting children and their progression across the town. So it meets, I think it's probably quarterly, Councillor Durham, and I don't attend it personally, so I'm not prey to it. I've been to it a couple of times and taken some issues to it, but I can imagine that in and of itself, it doesn't operate with a significant budget.
Okay. No, that's fine. I understand that.
Councillor, I think probably going back to Councillor Lee's point, it may well be that this committee would like to receive a report from it so that it can explain the work that it's been up to.
Okay, Councillor Darrell.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, councillors, are you happy for the report to be noted? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Chair. I think Councillor Cruddas had his hand up.
I was just signifying that I was happy for it to be noted, really.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving on to item 9, annual risk management report. Who's presenting this one?
That's me, Lee Downey, Chair.
Where are you, Lee? There you go, hiding away.
Yeah. Okay. So excuse me if I start coughing. I've got a cold, unfortunately. So the purpose of the report is to update members on the approach and the outcomes of the council's risk management processes. And in summary, positive progress continues to be made within the authority in terms of managing the key strategic risks, and also in terms of the work undertaken by officers to manage operational risks. The recommendation is the report be noted by committee. So if we move down to page 57 in your pack, which is the main report, there's a bit of background there around risk management being an essential and effective part of effective and efficient management and planning, and it strengthens the council's ability to achieve its objectives. It's also a key element of the council's planning processes is that areas of potential risk which could, prevent us from achieving those objectives are identified, and that we identify an officer whose responsibility is to manage those risks. What we do is we plot those on a standard likelihood and impact matrix, and there's a shaded area on that matrix which we can look at a little bit later, and that signifies the risk appetite line. So any risks above there, we ask the responsible officer to give us a thorough update to include in the main body of the report. Having presented this report in the past, I think it might be best just to, rather than jump back and forward between the appendices, is just to look at the significant risks at this stage. So they're listed in paragraph 8. So like I say, where the risks above the appetite line, we ask for a thorough explanation as to what the council's doing. So in terms of our corporate risks, we've got a new risk, and no surprises, it's COVID-19. It's sitting above the appetite line. And in terms of the risk, the key things that we've identified are health and safety of our workforce, health and safety of the public of Darlington, the impact on the economy of the borough and the people who live in the borough, and the financial impact on the council. So in terms of looking to mitigate those risks, in terms of health and safety of our workforce, we've introduced some safe working practices, or lots of safe working practices, in fact. In terms of the health and safety of the town, we're working with partners and the public to raise awareness of the risks and ensure that there's compliance within businesses and other sectors with the government guidance. In terms of the economy, we're working with government departments and Tees Valley Combined Authority to seek to limit the impacts and utilise any interventions to kickstart the economy. And in terms of the impact on the council, keeping the MTFP under constant review and taking appropriate decisions to safeguard the council's finances. Obviously, like I say, that's a new risk. The other risks that sit above the appetite line within children and adult services, these aren't new risks. These are ones that were sitting above the appetite line at the point of the 6-monthly report, and that they haven't actually moved on the matrix. But the key one is the inability to contain placement costs for children who are looked after by the local authority. So there's the explanation as to what we're doing around that is set out in paragraph I. I don't know if you're just happy to look at that, Chair, or you want me to kind of summarise?
But you just summarise it, please.
Yeah, so obviously there's a programme that's ongoing looking to meet the needs of children who we look after and to bring them closer to Darlington or actually within the borough. And that's a mix really of in-house foster care, residential care, specialist provision for children with complex needs. we're looking at it not just locally but regionally and nationally, and the work is being informed by other authorities. The second risk there is there's an increased demand for children's services, which can impact negatively on the budget, and work's ongoing with a transformation programme to try and safely reduce the level of risk in children's services. And that's been enhanced by work with colleagues from Leeds City Council, and that's under a DFE-sponsored Strengthening Families programme. And the final risk in children and adults, which is sitting above the risk appetite line, is failure to respond appropriately to safeguard vulnerable children. Obviously, that would be a particularly catastrophic situation. So services are in place to screen any contacts and referrals that come in, and to ensure that those, we're able to respond to those concerns. And thresholds for interventions are multi-agency, and we ensure that our own staff understand and apply the thresholds robustly.
Can I just stop you then?
Yes.
If you've got any questions on safeguarding of the children, such an important subject. Any questions from what we've heard? No? But could I ask one? I mean, there is this general comment, increased demand, inability to contain. Can we quantify the increase in demand? Can we, and the costs associated with the placement costs? Because it's an awful lot of money, isn't it? Which is, did that come into your remit or anyone's remit?
I can't off the top of my head, but I believe that Children's Services and Brett in the finance officer obviously monitors that closely and looks at the kind of the demands and the budget implications of that on a regular basis. So we could provide some information around that.
Okay, Mr. Carrick.
Yeah, Chair, just to add a bit of context to that, it's difficult to give you a definite answer on that, because each individual child could cost a different amount. It depends on the complex needs of the children that we're talking about. So, I mean, one could cost £5,000 a week, another one could cost £25,000 a week. It's difficult, but we do monitor that, and we do monitor the costs. So to give you sort of an indicative answer, it will be difficult. But as Lee says, we do monitor that, and we do sort of, when we do the budget management, the quarterly to Cabinet, all that's taken into account, so it will be reported to Cabinet. So it's an ad lib management technique. We've got to accept it goes along. It's not really it's not an ad lib management. We do like a weekly check of it. It's quite intense, the checks that they do on the looked after children. So it's not something that's just sort of done as and when. It's quite intense.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Councillor Curtis.
I think you'll find, Gerald, that Jane Kaczynski, when she sits on her desk on a Monday morning, gets some real pings about the things that's hot. Every single child that needs, what would be considered large amounts of money spent to look after them are immediately brought to her attention and the attention of the Director of Children's Services. And I think every single one of these large expenditures actually goes up and is authorised by the Chief Executive. So it's absolutely high profile and very visible. There's no, whilst it's a lot of money we spend and we don't have any option of not spending it, it is very, very tightly controlled. And I don't think there's much more we can do other than what's been described about trying to provide settings in which we can provide the care that's required closer to home and therefore in a less expensive way. I think it's top of everyone's list, Gerald.
No, thank you for that. I think the question really was just given the financial situation and this sort of money coming out as and when, just how we manage that. But anyway, thank you very much for that. Lee, would you like to continue?
Yes, Chair. So moving on to economic growth and neighbourhood services, there's two risks that have been identified above the risk appetite line. One of those has been reworded, and again it relates to obviously what's going on at the moment. So significant impacts arising from the reduction in available cash resources to the economy, the council's GF and HRA and business is due to the impacts of increased levels of unemployment and universal credit payments. So in terms of trying to manage that risk, the council's increased the bad debt provision, and there's a new risk, and again, inability to cope with significant increases in homelessness cases due to the new requirements of MHCLG to accommodate everyone irrespective of status in order to limit the spread of COVID-19, and also increased levels of homelessness due to increased relationship breakdowns and financial difficulties. So work's ongoing with MHCLG and the People's Commissioner to attract funding and commission new services. And I think this report's quite unusual in that there's a lot of new risks identified. We've never had so many risks above the appetite line, I think, and obviously quite a few of them, as we've seen, are a direct result of the ongoing global pandemic. Within resources, there were no risks identified above the appetite line. So if I can just kind of draw your attention down to Appendix A, which is on page 62 of your pack. So this is a corporate risk register, and as we can see, the risk we've talked about, COVID-19, is number 18, and it's in the grey area on the appendix, which is above the appetite line. The other risks we have at a corporate level, they've sat pretty much where they were. They've not moved on the matrix, so there's no commentary around, kind of what's happening with those. If we move down to Appendix B, the children and adult services risk, we can see the three risks we talked about being above the appetite line are in the grey shaded area on the chart. And if we move down to the other risks in children and adult services, the majority of them have not moved as we move down the chart until we get to CNA 15, which is a new risk. So a number of new risks were identified in the area of public health. None of them were above the appetite line, so that there isn't a full paragraph in the main body of the report, but there's some narrative in the kind of reason for movement on the matrix column, which is the the fifth column along, explaining kind of what work's been undertaken to try and manage those risks. Finally, if we move down then to Appendix C, economic growth, we can see those two risks again we talked about above the appetite line, and there's a whole host of other risks sitting below the line which are detailed in the table. Again, there's quite a few that haven't moved until we get down to number 17. Again, it's arising as a result of COVID. It's a new risk, and it's around customers and audiences and their confidence to return back to our leisure and cultural facilities. Obviously, there's some explanation as to what we're doing around that. So there's work ongoing, developing a strategy to reopen in a safe and phased manner and in line with the government guidance. There's a number 18 is another risk arising from COVID, our ability to complete highway schemes and projects. So they're being delivered and managed again in accordance with government guidance. And as we move down to number 19, potential impact on public transport networks if commercial services don't recover or continue to receive support from government and routes are withdrawn. So we're working with TVCA around that. And there's a number 20 was above the appetite line, and we've already covered that one. There was no change in resources. And if we go back up to the main body of the report, there's some explanation around the operational risks, which starts on page 59 of your report. I won't go through each of those, but that's where we've gone to the various offices around the council, looking at the operational issues that are arising and what we're doing to manage those. So are there any questions members would like to ask?
Any questions from members? Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back to economic growth and neighbourhood services. It's obviously mentioned about the HRA and just going back. Yeah, reduction in available cash resources to the local economy, the collection, the HRA. It mentions there the council has increased the bad debt provision.
Yeah.
Do we know what the provision has been increased to and what from?
I don't off the top of my head, Councillor. I'd have to speak to Pauline Mitchell, I think, unless anyone else is aware of that. Peter?
Yeah, Councillor, we've increased it by £500,000, and it was, what is it? I can't remember what the eggs at the moment, but we've increased it by £500,000 for failure to people to actually be able to pay the council tax and the like.
Okay. And that effectively will be taken from the HRA.
No, that's the general fund. That's the general fund one.
Sorry, general fund.
Yeah, council tax is a general fund.
Right.
So it has no effect on the HRA.
Right. Okay. Do we know? Has there been an increase on the HRA provision? Because I think that stands at about £50,000.
Not as far as I know, because there's nothing. We haven't identified anything on the HRA yet,
Okay.
for anything for COVID. I mean, I'd just like to say, although we've increased it by £500,000, the bad debt provision, we have put, because we are getting some help off the government, and we've put that in as one of our pressures, because the government have funded sort of, I think it's about £4 billion they're given to the local authorities in England. We've got our proportion of it, and that's identified as one of our pressures in there. Again, that was presented to Cabinet in for the first quarter, which went in July, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rodas?
Yeah, as always, when I listen to Lee's presentation, it gives me some comfort that the council have got all of the high-risk things on the radar. And, I think we've talked about in the past trying to do some sort of presentation for the full council, because we keep, people on the full council don't realise how comprehensive our focus is on the risks that the council have. And I was just going to propose, Chair, that it might be an idea to do a sort of a presentation to the full, to all members of the council, just explaining, what our focus is risk-wise. It seems I get great comfort from this presentation Lee does, because you can see exactly where we making our efforts, and it's not always clear when you don't have this presentation just how focused we are. People get keep raising things that if they knew the risks we were focused on, they wouldn't need to raise. Just a thought. Some training in the future.
Thank you for that. Alison, how would we take that forward?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I've made a note of that. I could certainly leave that one with me, and we can explore definitely.
Right. Thank you very much. Just a comment from yourself on the spreadsheets in appendix whatever, where it identifies the risk. Would it be possible to actually put a date when the risk was identified, and perhaps a final date when hopefully to give a timescale for the risk to be dealt with? I know it would be varied, it's so much more difficult with other ones, because this is the first time I've seen this, first time I've sat on this committee, and I'm thinking to myself, well, how long have these been known, and what's happened over that timescale? So if we had a date when the risk was identified, a potential date when the risk has got to have a solution, who's handling it, and then an update, and then we can follow it through, rather than sort of the vacant comments like, we have a risk, the responsible person is, but then nothing else. So can we incorporate that in any future summary? Lee, are you happy with that?
Yes, I have a 6-monthly date when a risk's identified, which I record separately outside of the report, and also I record when risks are closed off, so we've got an historic record. But we could certainly look to include that, when it was identified, and if there is a target date for completion, to include that in there.
Thank you very much, Lee.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Any more questions, councillors? No. So Are we all happy? We noted everything's okay with it? Right, thank you very much, Lee.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Moving on to item 10, ethical governance and member standards, an update report by, who's doing this one?
Good morning, Chair. So I'm presenting this report. So Luke Swinhoe, Assistant Director, Law and Governance. So this is a report that comes before this committee twice a year, updating you on developments relating to member standards, but also looking at a range of ethical indicators that are used to flag up potential matters of concern or not relating to ethical health. It's a reasonably kind of long report. There's some matters of detail, so I was just going to flag up some of the key issues rather than go through it, on every single matter. So on the ethical governance side of things, can I take members to paragraph 7? So this is just to note that the Local Government Association has been reviewing the Code of Conduct. It consulted on a model Code of Conduct. The consultation finished on the 17th of August. And currently the LGA is considering the consultation responses. So there is a link in the report to the LGA site, and I circulated information to members earlier in the summer about the consultation. So my suggestion at this point is that we wait and see what the final position of the Local Government Association is in respect to the consultation on their model Code of Conduct, and then we can look back to see if there's anything that needs to be done to our Code of Conduct here. So I was going to propose, if it's acceptable, to bring a further report back to this committee after the final position of the LGA is known, and then this committee can consider whether or not there needs to be any further work done on our Code of Conduct. So I don't know whether at this point you want to consider that particular issue before we move on.
Councillors, are you happy with that? Councillor Durham, Councillor Paley, have you gone?
Yes, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Credit? Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much, Luke.
Thank you, Chair. So the next matter I wanted to draw to your attention is paragraph 10. So this is in reference to the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And they made some recommendations in January 2019, some best practice recommendations for local authorities to adopt in regard to how they deal with member standards and conduct issues. What they have done, and it's in Appendix 2, is to send a follow-up letter to local authority chief executives, which was sent in the sort of last part of July. So it's essentially asking local authorities, what our position is on the best practice recommendations that they earlier set out. So what I've done, and it's just after paragraph 11, is to set out in a table the best practice recommendations with some commentary and our current position. There are 15 recommendations in total. I don't know whether you want to go through them all, but I would like to draw the attention of members to recommendation 3 and also recommendation 7. And obviously we can pick up the other ones if you want to as well. So one of the recommendations is about a review of the Code of Conduct each year. This is something we've never previously done, so we've adopted changes to the Code of Conduct, as and when we felt it was appropriate, and also if there were specific issues raised by government. So there were national codes of conduct which were mandatory initially. So as a result of the Local Government Act 2000, we had to adopt a Code of Conduct. And then there was a revised Code of Conduct in 2007, which we had to adopt. And then things changed as a result of the Localism Act, where essentially there was more local choice and freedom for how we adopted a local Code of Conduct, subject to some mandatory principles to do with pecuniary interests. So our Code of Conduct, broadly speaking, has stayed the same. We could do a review every year, but it could be quite a big piece of work if that's something that was to be done, if we had to consult and deal with it on that basis. Another possibility might be to bring back a report more specifically on the code of conduct and how it's working, if there's been any particular issues or concerns about aspects of the code or issues that are requiring further attention. And the only thing I'd mention on that is changing the code of conduct is obviously something for full council, because it's one of the things that the full council has to adopt. So the process for change, it's slightly more involved than obviously just this committee kind of having a view about it, but this committee's views could obviously be fed back into full council. So I don't know whether you wanted to think about that particular point before we move on.
Thanks, sir. That's a good idea. Any comment from many councils on that particular issue? No. I think I would just simply question how the consultation would go with the public, whether that would be a small committee, should that be adopted, selected from the community, or would it be a questionnaire and all the work that goes with that? And I think I would just question really what the objectives would be of involving people outside of the council. Councillor Crudder?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we review what's been done by what's being covered by the Code of Conduct year on year, it gives us a good idea of the things that may or may not have been caught and the things that may need to be included. So I think it's a watching brief really as we go along to, from my point of view, if we come across something that we think the Code of Conduct should have caught and didn't, then we should do something about it. So actually doing a yearly review doesn't seem like a very good use of resource.
I would agree with that. Councillor Durham, are you okay?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Bailey?
Yes, that's fine with me, thank you.
Okay, Luke.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, I mean, just reflecting back on this, it's quite interesting if you've been in local government for a while, you see things, coming around full circle, because we used to have the Committee on Standards. We used to have Standards for England, commonly called the Standards Board, which was a strategic regulator, and Committee on Standards in Public Life is slightly moving towards that, in terms of strategic regulation and oversight, without a formal sort of statutory basis for it. So it'll be interesting to see how this area develops, because the idea for abolishing the Standards Board for England was to take away some of the compliance issues that came from Standards Board for England and effectively deregulate the way things were done in terms of the sort of mandatory reporting and compliance that we had with the Standards Board for England. So I'm just interested to see, and maybe this committee will be as well, how the Committee on Standards in Public Life seek to develop this as we move forward. So we'll see how that goes. The other one that I was going to comment on, but obviously there's others that you can look at as well. So was whether or not this committee should have a further independent person. So this is point 7. So currently we have, statutorily we have to have at least one independent person. That's a requirement from the Localism Act. And we've only ever had one independent person, but there's obviously a vulnerability issue in terms of, whether that person is available at any given point, or if there's other issues to do with that person seeking to move on or do something different. The process for appointment, is a statutory process, so we have to advertise, and then it's a full council decision. So it's a longer process than most people might imagine. But we could appoint a second independent person. There potentially may be a cost implication for doing this, because it's a remunerated position. The current independent person is paid about £900 or so per annum. I think my own preference, I think, probably is moving towards thinking we probably should be looking to appoint a second independent person, or at least someone who could maybe act as a potential person who could stand in the shoes of the independent person if we needed to have that sort of appointment. So it could be maybe from another authority who's already got an independent person who could stand in as a kind of reserve player or something along those lines. But I don't know whether members have got any particular views on this.
Members? Councillor Durham?
Thank you, Chair. Luke, could I just ask, the independent person, how often is that role changed, or sorry, how often does that role get refreshed? So, you know, have we had an independent person? Are they been in place for a number of years now? The same person?
Yeah, the independent person was appointed in 2012, and they've continued in that role since. It wasn't time limited in terms of appointment. The person that we appointed was formally involved in doing a role as an independent member of the Standards Committee for, I think it was Middlesbrough Council. So they've got quite considerable experience on the area of standards. They practice as an independent barrister, and also she sits as a part-time judge. So she's quite an experienced individual, but you know, like everything in life, there's a risk in terms of you know continuity and cover and that kind of thing.
Is there potentially a risk in terms of being too familiar, if being in that role for, although it is an independent person, but holding that position for 8 years? I
don't know. I suppose you could say much the same for officers or anyone who's been in post for a long period of time. It's there are two arguments, aren't there? I guess. I mean, you gain experience by doing it for longer. Whether or not that has its own issues that you bring along with experience, because maybe you're not seeing things in the same way as a new person. There are different views, aren't there, about the extent to which being in the same position is a good or bad thing. Could affect me, could affect any one of us, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Luke.
Any other questions? So, Luke, I was saying this. The recommendation to have two is the second one effectively would be a stand-in, a reserve. It's not the fact that we need two people to.
No. Yeah. Again, that's quite a difficult issue because what we're required to do is to canvass the views of the independent person in terms of how we handle complaints, but also if there was a hearing, the independent person would have a role in terms of the hearing process, so they would be able to attend the hearing and ask questions and participate and give views at the end of the hearing process to the panel. So the panel would make a decision, but the independent person's views would be listened to, but they're not formally a decision maker. But that role doesn't sit very comfortably with the idea of two independent persons because, I guess there could be a slight difference of view, and then how do you deal with that? So we would still probably only use one independent person to support the process, but the second one would be more of a, kind of reserve player or someone we could alternate between the two. But it's not a sort of panel decision. I think different authorities probably do things, slightly different. It depends on. So we have a process where we used to have a standards committee with members, involved in making decisions, and we got rid of the standards committee when the changes came in as far as the Localism Act, was concerned, and we went to the, if you like, the sort of statutory minimum that came about as a result of the Localism Act, which one of the aims was to sort of scale back on cost and expenditure, because the cost of running a committee, can be expensive in terms of, sort of time and resource.
So could you just summarise your preference for the second one then? If he's...
Well, what I was thinking of moving forward, if
I have to select either A or B who's going to sit on this committee to make a decision, who would actually do that? Who would choose A or B?
So, are you asking who would appoint an independent person?
Well, no. But if we have two committees, who decides on which of the two independent people would sit on a committee to make judgment?
It's probably a bit like how it works with licensing subcommittees. You'd sort of see who was available to kind of deal with something. You might do it in an alternating way, depending on who's last been involved in doing something, or you'd invite kind of an indication of availability, essentially, I think. I mean, that is also going to be an issue, if in terms of commitments. So if there are issues where someone isn't available, we have to wait until our one independent person is available to do things. That's also an issue.
So, members, would you agree with Luke that we should appoint, or the council should appoint, a second independent person for Standards Committee? Yea and nay? Hands up for yea. You agree with Paul? Oh, would agree with Luke, sorry. Okay, it's 2-4, so we will go to our recommendation, Luke, to appoint a second independent officer.
Thank you very much, Chair. So those were the sort of comments that I had on the table. I specifically wanted to sort of have the views of members about, but I don't know whether there's any other issues that members want to sort of comment on before I move on.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, then the other part of the report is a number of data sets that, reported on, and the purpose of this is just to see if there's anything from those data sets that's indicating a possible issue of concern, in terms of the overall ethical health of the authority. So, if we have a sudden increase in complaints or issues or, concerns in one area that, would highlight some kind of failure or other area of concern. There is nothing particular in terms of any of the data sets that are reported on that I have anything particularly to comment on, but I don't know whether members want to raise anything.
Any comments from members?
Seems like normal business to me, Chair.
I think all in all, it's a good report, isn't it? It reflects well on the council. Councillor Durham.
Yeah, I think just looking at the report, obviously when you take into account quarter one, it looks as though there has been an impact on look at the number of corporate complaints and information requests received on, doesn't have a page number. You look at the line of travel on a quarterly basis, and it suggests that COVID has had an impact there.
What page do you want? Sorry.
I haven't actually got a page number here, but it's the graph which is number of corporate complaints and information requests received. We've all got to scroll.
It's page 88 on the pack, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just looking at it, and it obviously says their corporate complaints for a quarter is 100, where the line of travel over the recent years has been, the 600. So, and similarly with FOI requests. So it's
If I could come in here, Chair, I think the graph is slightly misleading because it just connects to the lower level that's reported on the quarter, which is not obviously where the year end is going to end up. Mm-hmm. So it looks like it's dramatically falling away, but it's just because it's actually representing a quarter, and the figure obviously is low because of the quarterly sort of report. But the other issue to mention is that there will be some changes, I think, as a result of COVID, because one of the things we did early on was to indicate to internally and externally that we weren't expecting the same turnaround times in terms of responses to freedom of information requests or initially to do with complaints because of the resource implications on staff dealing with COVID related work. As you appreciate, when COVID sort of hit, suddenly everyone's world changed, and we had to sort of focus on a whole load of changes to services and new ways of working and all the rest of it. And so we had to sort of allocate the resources where the most need was pressing. So unfortunately, some of the response times will have suffered as a result of that. I don't know whether Lee Downey wants to come in and say any more on that.
Before you do, Lee, have you got any other comments?
Yes, it's a fair observation Councillor Durham makes. Although response times are slower, that the graph showing how many we received. In corporate complaints in the first quarter, we received 100 complaints. If you look at the annual average is about 600, I think, on that graph. Yeah. So obviously, if we times that by 4, we're going to see as it picks up later on. I think we did receive fewer complaints in adult social care, certainly in the first quarter, as well in other areas of the council. I'm not sure no one's really pried into exactly why, but it did relate to the impact COVID had, and people presumably staying at home and trying to stay safe and having less interactions and less cause for complaint. We certainly saw a drop off there. It seems anecdotally to be returning to kind of pre-COVID levels at the minute, but I'd have to do a bit of research to confirm that.
Thank you, Lee. Just one additional question for Luke. It was just going back to the previous table and the recommendations, and point 15. Where it says senior recommendations, best practice, senior officers should meet regularly with political group leaders or group whips to discuss standard issues. And where we're at this moment in time, it says meetings are arranged where necessary. An annual training on the code of conduct is provided to all members. And obviously this provides a forum for issues of particular relevance to be raised. Just one question, just delving deep into the code of conduct, is obviously it's around members' interests, and I was just wondering how regularly is that updated?
Every year we send a kind of follow-up to members to ask members to kind of refresh, their register interests, because obviously, they get, have changes like move or new jobs or, other kind of issues that they need to think about and declare. And we get a fairly good response from all members. The Democratic Services follow up a number of times to make sure that members have sort of like responded, and then the new forms are then put on our website. But obviously members have an ongoing obligation to consider their register interests at any relevant point where there's a change and provide an update.
Right. Yeah. I thought that was the case. I just wanted to confirm it's the members' responsibility to make sure it's updated.
It is. It's like a lot of things, but we try to help where we can. But there is an individual responsibility for members to comply, with issues to do with the code of conduct.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke.
Any more, Luke?
No, that was the end of my report, unless anyone has any further questions.
Any further questions, anyone? Happy for the report to be noted?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Luke. Moving on to item 11, Manager's Assurance Statement.
That's me, Chair. Thank you.
Hello.
Lee Downey. So in summary, the outcome of a completed manager's assurance statement reported to Audit Committee. The manager's assurance statements are a key element of the council's governance arrangements, and based on the 2019-20 return, essentially concludes that a very thorough review was undertaken this year, and that generally an overall positive position was identified. There were no common themes identified running through the manager's assurance statements, but there were some service-specific issues which assistant directors had planned to progress during 2021. Again, the recommendation is simply that the report be noted. So we move down to the main report, 85. It explains a little bit about the manager's assurance statement. So it's a standard template and it covers various aspects of the council's internal control environment on which assurance is required. It covers all sorts of things, so risk, financial management, health and safety, information governance, HR, complaints. We're seeking assurance that the staff in those areas have a good understanding of what they need to do when, dealing with money or whatever it might be. So in terms of providing assurance, the manager's assurance statements do say that, it can't eliminate risk. It can only provide a reasonable and not absolute assurance. So the statements have been completed by all ADs and they've been uploaded to the intranet. So again, there's a link in the report which members can follow, and you can have a look at the particular areas in your portfolio and what those themes are. arising, but I've summarised them in the report here for you. So like I said, there was no common improvement themes, but in terms of service-specific issues, there was a number of issues identified in adult social care, which I've actually pulled out into the report this time for ease of reference. In terms of commissioning, performance and transformation, we see one around business continuity plans, and this arised. It didn't really constitute a common improvement theme, but it also came up for transport and capital projects and resources. Or potentially, actually, it came up in housing as well. So it wasn't across the board, so I didn't consider it a common improvement theme, but there were a number of areas who wanted to look at the business continuity plans, which have actually been fairly thoroughly tested, I would say, over the last 6 months. So I won't go through them all, but I've simply bullet pointed those improvement the improvements to be made for next time round. And like I say, they're to be progressed by assistant directors during 2021. So generally, like I say, it was an overall fairly positive position. It was a thorough review. There were no common themes really, although, you know, business continuity plans were bordering on a common theme, and there were a number of service-specific issues that are going to be progressed. So, any questions?
Councillors? I think the only comment I would make really is, again, we have these sort of vague comments on when these things are going to be done.
Yeah.
We refer to further development, housing and building, health and safety to be reviewed, resources, business continuity plan to be reviewed with a particular reference to, and so on. Is it possible to put dates on these so again we can follow it through?
Yeah, so if you click on the link and it takes you actually through the manager's assurance statement completed by the assistant director, some of those will have an officer and a date. Actually, in the manager's assurance statement itself, I could pull, in terms of summarising them, I could pull through, but like I said, to be completed during 2021, but if we've got specific dates, we could pull those through into the report, if that would be helpful.
I think I would like to see them.
Yeah.
Councillors, okay? Noted. Thank you very much, Lee. Moving on to item 12, audit services. Audit Charter 2000. Who's doing that one?
Yes, Chair, it's myself, Andrew Barber, Audit and Risk Manager. Nice to meet you, Chair.
Nice to see you.
Never met before. Each year, the Audit Service provides a charter which describes how we're going to deliver the service. Most of the members are aware, but you may not be, Chair, that the service is a shared service with Stockton-on-Teesborough Council. Yeah. So this charter identifies how we're going to deliver the service to each authority. Essentially, it's the same service to each authority. There's no differentiation between the two. The charter hasn't really changed much from previous versions. A couple of wording tweaks here and there, but nothing major. I think one of the main points is around the access to information. So we have a right of access to any information or any officers at any point in order to conduct our work. I think that's one of the main things that needs to be noted. And if that's approved by members, then that gives us that authority to do that. But other than that, it's just the usual, we're going to risk assess each area, undertake work on a periodic basis based on that risk assessment, and that each audit will comply with the Code of Ethics, which they sign each year to say they will comply with. I didn't want to go through in too much more detail than that, but I will take any questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Andrew.
Morning.
I was just wondering if you could just give us an overview of how COVID is affecting the team's work.
Yes, I'll pick it up now. I will mention in a later report, but essentially,
if that's the case, then yeah, I'm more than happy for that to come in. Yeah, yep. Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. Then we note the report. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Andrew. Moving on to item 13, Treasury Management Annual and Outturn Prudential Indicators.
That's me, Chair, Peter Carrick.
Hello, Peter.
Hiya. Hello. This is the third of 3 statutory reports relating to Treasury Management that Audit Committee must consider and forward to Cabinet and Council for approval. The report is about the affordability of the Council's borrowing and how it is managed, and critically the investments are secure and accessible. The Council's capital spending and Treasury Management activities are regulated by legislation and the mandatory Prudential Code, including a number of key indicators that are itemised actually in the report, which I'll touch on later. The information in the report shows that the Council's capital spending plans and Treasury Management activities are legal, prudent, affordable and sustainable, and they're an integral part of the Council's financial plans. So if I can take you to Table 1 on page 109, please, Chair. This shows that the actual need for borrowing only increased for capital purposes by 2.559 million, as all the other spend was covered by grants, contributions or capital receipts. The Council's underlying need to borrow is called the Capital Financing Requirement. It's commonly known in financial circles as the CFR. The figure is a gauge of the Council's debt position, and it represents the capital expenditures not yet being paid for by revenue or other resources. So it's effectively what's outstanding that we haven't actually funded yet. If we go to page 110 on Table 2, the CFR has increased. You can see the CFR has increased by the same 2.559 million to 219,489,000. This is due to the additional capital expenditure that will need to be borrowed for potentially in 2021. The Council's total debt outstanding at the 31st of March 2020 was 181,661,000. You need to add to that the outstanding PFI amount we've got for our PFI schools, which was Harrogate Hill and the Education Village. But if you add them together, it's still £26 million below the CFR. What this means is that the Council is effectively under-borrowed in so much as that some of the borrowing is being financed by internal investments such as earmarked reserves. So we're not actually borrowing up to our level that we need to borrow because we're using our internal reserves to actually fund some of that borrowing because it's cheaper for us. The key prudential indicators are shown in Table 5 on page 112. The main one being the authorised limit, and this is the main one because the Council can't actually borrow above this. They don't have the power to borrow above this limit. These are actually set by Audit Committee when I bring the Treasury Management strategy in. It'll be in January 2021 for next year, and it was actually brought in January this year for 2020-21. And they've got to be agreed by Audit Committee each year. There's 2 other statutory reports that I bring sort of during the year. And as you can see, we are well below the approved authorised limit. The Council is continuing to manage its investment with security as the #1 priority. We always look for security first, not yield. It's an availability, it's security, and we actually are achieving better than average on the money that we've invested. So on Table 10, which is on page 118, it shows a table with the financing costs, which we've actually outturned at £268,000 better than the budget that was in the medium-term financial plan. And that's mainly as a result of the increased investment income we've had from our property funds that the committee is aware of. We have £30 million worth of property funds with 3 providers. We have our joint ventures with our Esh Homes, who sort of build our houses, and we have sort of joint venture with them where we get 50% of the profit. And our other investments where I invest in the money market funds. And really that's all I wanted to say, and I'll take any questions, Chair.
Questions, councillors? No? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Report is noted. Item 14 is audit services.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Now you're back to you, Andrew. Yeah.
Members will be, well, the majority of members will be used to seeing quite a detailed performance report from me each quarter. As the majority of members know, we switched the way we were doing our audits for this year. So we're looking at controls rather than full services, if you like. So at the moment, I'll have to issue an apology in that we haven't got a full detailed report available yet for members. I am working on those at the moment to provide members with more information on what's in this report. But what's in this report is a summary of the work we've done to date for Darlington and the outcomes of that work. So you'll see that the majority of the testing we've done have come out as green status, a couple of ambers, but there's nothing really to concern members at the moment on those. The next table on the report is looking at our planned work for the next period. So they're the numbers in terms of how many controls we're going to be looking at. And I think the important thing on here is to look at the resources we have available. So members are assured that we do have sufficient resource to deliver that testing. Obviously, in the past, I used to bring a full list of all the audits. I think that stood at about 140 in number, whereas in terms of controls, we're talking around 500 or so, and I don't think it's feasible to bring a full list of the full 500. So I am working on different ways to present that information to members, and I will be asking for feedback in the coming months once I've decided on what best to present members with. But the report's just a note that we have been doing some work in the last few months and that we are planning on doing more work in the next quarter. But I will take any questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Andrew, just going back to what I asked earlier, how has COVID impacted the team?
Yeah, initially, obviously, when everything kicked off, if you like, services were under a great deal of pressure. So from an audit perspective, we weren't in services asking them questions at the time. We were there to provide advice and guidance, and a number of services did contact us and ask for some advice and guidance on different ways they could operate under the circumstances, particularly things around how we could handle cash, how we could get hold of cash and distribute that cash. So we have provided some advice and guidance. In one sense, it's been a positive in that if auditors weren't out doing audit work, what we've been able to do is we've been able to load a lot of historic data into the new process and load them against those new controls. And so we've actually been able to load up quite a lot of historic data, which probably would have taken us 18 months to get loaded up otherwise. So they've been busy, but busy uploading the system, if you like, rather than being out at services. But we have been testing within services since the end of May, the beginning of June. It is back on track now, essentially, and we are now up and running full steam ahead.
Yeah, you obviously make comment there to people looking for advice, because I'm assuming that obviously through all this, people have had to move at pace, and some controls may have been stretched, shall we say, rather than broken.
Yeah, so I'm quite pleased in the number of departments have actually come to us and asked for our advice and guidance rather than just going off and doing things on their own. So we've been able to provide that advice, and in a number of areas we've actually been able to streamline the controls so that they still meet the needs and reduce the risk, but they're actually probably better than what was in there in the first place. So it's been positive in a number of areas in terms of streamlining processes and improving those processes going forward in any case. But I don't have any concerns about any significantly increased risk in areas based on the discussions we've had.
Thank you.
As new to the committee, Andrew, I was delighted you described what RAG work. I was trying to read this.
Sorry.
I've got to do with anything. Well, thank you for that. But again, I would ask, really, could we have some timescales on these kind of things? Yeah, you know, there are no, well, there are some very high ones, but I think it would help us all to understand when you identified the result and just how long it will take before you hope to sort it out.
Yes. Future iterations of this report will have details around recommendations that we've made in chair. And they all have a timescale against them and a named officer. We'll also be providing feedback of when those timescales aren't being met. It's a big change in terms of how we're reporting within the service, and that's just taking a bit of time to get all the reports set up on the system, to be perfectly frank with you, Chair.
But I think very worthwhile. Thank you very much, Andrew. Councillors, it's recommended that the activity and results be noted. Okay. Thank you. Moving on to 15, Audit Services Annual Plan 2019-2020.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's me again.
Andrew.
So this is the annual report based on our work from last year, and it incorporates my overall opinion on the control environment within the authority. I will draw members' attention to which paragraph? Yeah, so paragraph 10 on the main report, page 132 on the pack. So obviously this talks about a number of changes throughout the year that impacted on the original audit plan that was set. So the service carried 2 vacancies throughout the year. I'm pleased to say those vacancies have both been filled, and the new members of staff have settled in very nicely. Originally at the start of the year, we set a target of completing 45% of the audit portfolio. Now that's not just what was planned, that is the whole entire portfolio. So despite some of the challenges we had, we were still able to deliver 47% of the audit portfolio, which means I'm satisfied that we've done sufficient work in order to provide the annual opinion. And there's no reason to give any caveats to that opinion. So Appendix 1 is the detailed report. Again, I'm not intending to go through all of that in any great detail. I will mention on page 135 of your pack, paragraph 1.6, gives a summary of the original number of audits we plan to undertake, the number that were cancelled or deferred, and then the actual numbers completed. So as I say, we've had to scale back our work towards the back end of the year because of COVID, but we were able to complete sufficient numbers of audits. The ones that are ongoing are not started. The ongoing ones will be finished, but we will not be starting those that are classed as not started because we have switched to the new process and the new system, and they don't fit in to that new system. We will be looking at the controls within those areas within the new system sooner rather than later, so they will be getting picked up, but not quite in the same way. Paragraph 111 is the recommendations made. As you'll see, the vast majority are in our low and medium category. There's only a small number in the high category, and the majority of those were in one area. It was the sports complex, if I remember rightly, and it was just to do with some of the controls around managing contracts. We felt they needed tightening up, and so that's where the high areas are. But as I said, the majority are in the low and medium category, which is positive. And if we talk about the assurance levels, again, we're giving full or substantial assurance. If I'm able to give substantial assurance on an audit, that generally means that, yeah, things are operating very well, and there's just a few things tweak here and there, and only a couple of moderate assurance ones. So generally it's a very positive picture. So if we go down to the overall assurance opinion, which is paragraph 113 on page 137. So because of the work we've done, and the results of that work, it's my opinion that the council continues to have an appropriate and effective system of internal control, which it can place reasonable reliance to deliver the council's objectives and detect fraud or malpractice in a reasonable period of time. So that's basically a clean bill of health from the work we've done. The next statement is about our compliance with the standards, and there isn't anything too significant to point out there, so the service is in compliance with the standards. And the rest of the report just gives a few more details around some of the results. I wasn't intending to run through in too much detail unless there are any questions.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Durham? Councillor Durham?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of questions, and it maybe you may have to come back with some further information. But
Yeah.
point 4.5, the table there.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's some recommendations. If I go down to number 3, information governance and assurance.
Yes.
There are 2 which are marked as high, and just if I'm reading this right, yes, it is the 2 that are marked at high, and also on health and safety, there's 1 that's marked as high.
Yeah.
It may be the fact that are you able to supply us with or Chair, would we be able to be supplied with the background to those recommendations?
Yes, I would have to send them through after the meeting if that's okay. Because if I try and do anything else on my machine right now, it'll fall over. Is that okay for members?
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, hopefully my wife will pick that up. Just on that though, where we do have high and critical, can they be summarised in the report so it prevents having to ask that question?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, Chair, it's my intention to bring more information on the recommendations themselves to future meetings.
Excellent.
It's not generally something we've done in the past, but it's something I will be looking to do moving forward. I think it is useful information for members. The only thing that may prevent the information coming to members is, with it being a public meeting, if there's any information in there that could impact on the council itself or increase any risk in any area, we may have to manage the release of that information. But as things stand, the intention is to show members certainly those high-level recommendations moving forward and a progress report against those recommendations.
Thank you, Andrew. Sorry about that. I think that information is worthwhile because it does beg the question.
Yes, I appreciate that.
High and critical. It's in the interest of us all to know just what that refers to. But I do take your point that there may be bits of information which is quite sensitive.
Yes, we may not want to publicly admit where we've got weaknesses in our system for someone else to exploit. So yes, but they'll all be dealt with on their merits. If there's no reason not to produce the information, then I will be producing the information. Lovely.
Well, just one question from me on page 135, going back to the chart at the bottom. There were 8 planned engagements cancelled and deferred. So the question is really, who has the authority to cancel them and why should it be cancelled?
Yes, it's a decision that I normally make looking at our resources to see what we've got available to deliver the work. I consider the risk in those areas, and then I would normally discuss it with senior managers within the authority and see if my assessment of the current level of risk is appropriate. You'll see the majority of the ones that were deferred, we had been looking on a continuous basis anyway, And so we had done some work in the recent past anyway, so it wasn't as if that there were areas that I'd never had any audit work done for 5 years or whatever. So they'd all been looked at to some extent within the last 12 months anyway. So it was felt that they were the lowest risk areas from an audit perspective, and they were the ones that it wasn't going to cause so many issues if we didn't do those at this moment in time. So it's a lot of it's quite a balancing act in terms of resource availability, Chair. But moving forward, we're going to be planning quarterly in advance now, so we shouldn't have those issues moving forward because we won't be producing a plan 12 months in advance. They're just going to be quarterly in advance, so that we won't be seeing those type of issues moving forward.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillors, okay with everything? Happy for it to be noted? Thanks, Andrew. Item 16 is supplementary items. Are there any supplementary items, councillors? No.
Sure.
Are there any questions to anyone? No. Well, leave me to thank everyone, thank councillors and our guests and officers for coming to provide this comprehensive report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.